Have you ever felt completely erased? To have 2 decades of your life, your sacrifices, and your love discarded like last season's fashion? Josephine Adler knew the feeling intimately. One moment, she was the devoted wife of a Wall Street titan. The next, she was replaced by a younger, shinier model. Her husband, Rafael, didn't just leave her. He publicly humiliated her, handing her a severance check in a velvet box meant for an anniversary gift. He thought he had shattered her, leaving her with nothing but memories. But he made one critical mistake. He forgot who she was before she was his wife. And he had no idea that in the world of true power and influence, he was just a guppy in an ocean ruled by sharks, one of whom was about to find Josephine the most fascinating person in the room. The crystal glasses at Per Se cast miniature rainbows across the starched white tablecloth. Outside, Columbus Circle glittered, a galaxy of city lights 30 floors below. Inside, the atmosphere was glacial. Josephine Adler watched her husband of 22 years, Rafael Shaw, scroll through his phone, his thumb moving with a bored, rhythmic flick. He hadn't looked at her. Not really. Since they'd sat down. "The sommelier recommends the 05 Screaming Eagle," she offered, her voice a quiet attempt to breach the silence. Rafael didn't look up. "Order whatever you want, Josie. It's all on me tonight." The words were meant to sound generous, but they landed like stones. It was always on him. Their entire life was on him. A fact he had reminded her of with increasing frequency over the past few years. She had been Josephine Adler, a promising art historian with a coveted spot in Columbia University's PhD program, specializing in the provenance of stolen Nazi art. She was brilliant, passionate, and on a clear path to a distinguished academic career. Then she met Rafael Shaw, a hungry, charismatic analyst at Goldman Sachs. He'd swept her off her feet, promising a world of partnership and adventure. He'd asked her to put her dissertation on hold, just for a year or 2, until his career stabilized. She had agreed. The years turned into a decade, then 2. Her research notes gathered dust in the attic of their Park Avenue penthouse, while she curated their life, their social calendar, and his image. The waiter, a man with a professionally serene expression, approached. Rafael finally put his phone down, but not to look at her. He waved the waiter away. "We'll need a moment." He slid a flat, dark blue velvet box across the table. It was the size and shape of a jewelry box for a necklace. Their 23rd anniversary was next month. For a fleeting, foolish second, her heart fluttered. "Greg," she began, a soft smile touching her lips. "You shouldn't have." "Open it," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. There was no diamond necklace. There was no piece of jewelry at all. Inside, nestled against the satin lining, was a platinum credit card and a folded piece of paper. A cashier's check. She stared at it, her mind refusing to process the numbers. The check was for $5 million. The credit card had her name on it. "What is this?" she whispered, the bustling sounds of the restaurant fading into a dull roar in her ears. "That," Rafael said, finally meeting her gaze, his blue eyes as cold as a winter sky, "is your severance package. A very generous one, I might add. The apartment is in my name. The Hamptons house is in my name. This is clean, tidy. No messy lawyers." Josephine felt the air leave her lungs. "Severance? Are you firing me, Greg?" The question was absurd, hysterical, but it was the only one that came out. "In a way," he said, steepling his fingers. "I'm moving on, Josie. I've met someone. Her name is Tiffany. She's more aligned with my future." Tiffany. Josephine had seen her on Rafael's social media feed. A 24-year-old fitness influencer with a blindingly white smile and a body that defied gravity. She had assumed it was a harmless midlife crisis flirtation, a foolish, naive assumption. 22 years, Josephine breathed, the words barely audible. My whole adult life. And you were well compensated for it, he countered smoothly, his voice taking on the tone he used in boardrooms. You lived a life most people can only dream of. Private jets, front row seats at Fashion Week, dinners at places like this. Don't be dramatic. This is an amicable separation. I'm setting you up for a comfortable life. He made it sound like a business transaction, an asset being liquidated. The velvet box was the ultimate insult, a cruel parody of the affection he once showed her. He had packaged the end of their marriage like a parting gift for a retiring employee. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. Every eye in the restaurant seemed to be on them. She could feel the pitying glances, the speculative whispers. The wife of Rafael Shaw, the titan of finance, being publicly discarded. She closed the box with a quiet click. Her hands were steady now, a strange, cold calm settling over her. She would not cry. She would not scream. She would not give him the satisfaction of a scene. She had curated his life with elegance and grace, and she would exit it the same way. I see, she said, her voice even. Well, thank you for the dinner, Raphael. She stood up, her spine straight. She looked down at him, at his expensive, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, his Patek Philippe watch, the smug certainty on his face. He was already a stranger, the man she had loved, the man who had pleaded with her to edit his business proposals in the dead of night, the man whose head she had held over the toilet after a bad trade. That man was gone. In his place was this cold, calculating machine. You'll have to move out by the end of the month, of course, he added, as if discussing housekeeping. Tiffany is eager to redecorate. Josephine didn't grace that with a response. She turned and walked away, her head held high. She navigated the maze of tables, her steps measured and deliberate. She didn't look back. She could feel his eyes on her, and she knew he wasn't looking at her with remorse, but with appraisal, judging her exit. He was probably congratulating himself on how smoothly it had all gone. She didn't fall apart in the elevator. She didn't fall apart in the taxi. She didn't fall apart as the doorman of their building tipped his hat to her, oblivious to the fact that she was about to become homeless. It was only when she stood in the center of their cavernous, art-filled living room, a room she had designed, filled with pieces she had painstakingly sourced, that the first crack appeared in her composure. On the wall hung a small, unassuming painting of the French countryside. It was the first piece of art they had ever bought together from a street artist in Montmartre on their honeymoon. It was probably worthless. She walked over to it, her fingers tracing the faded brush strokes, and in the suffocating silence of the life she had built, Josephine Adler finally allowed herself to break. The first week was a blur of logistics, a cruel, systematic dismantling of a shared existence. Josephine moved like an automaton through the sleek, impersonal spaces of the penthouse. Each object she packed was a ghost. The leather-bound books in the library they had never read. The silver frames holding photos of a smiling, younger couple in Tuscany, in St. Bart's, on a ski lift in Aspen. They were props from a life that was no longer hers. Raphael was conspicuously absent, communicating only through his assistant, a brisk young woman named Lauren who spoke in bullet points. Mr. Shaw requests you itemize any personal effects you wish to keep. Mr. Shaw has arranged for movers next Tuesday. The most painful part was the closet, a vast, walk-in space that was a testament to Raphael's success. His side was a regimented army of bespoke suits and Italian shoes. Her side was a museum of the woman she had become. Designer gowns for galas, cocktail dresses for fundraisers, resort wear for obligatory corporate retreats. She was the perfect accessory, always dressed for the part. Hidden in the very back, in a garment bag she hadn't opened in 15 years, was her old life. A pair of worn corduroy blazers, sensible flat shoes, and a thick, leather-bound portfolio. She unzipped the bag, the scent of old paper and leather filling the air. Inside were the first 3 chapters of her dissertation, The Ghost Collection, tracing the Vandermeer Vermeer. It was a detective story spanning centuries, her life's passion, abandoned for a man who now considered her a depreciated asset. She packed the portfolio and a few cherished books. The rest, the gowns, the jewels, the life of Mrs. Rafael Shaw, she left behind. She didn't want any of it. It was a costume, and the play was over. With the $5 million check deposited, a sum that felt both immense and insulting, she found a furnished apartment to rent in a pre-war building on the Upper West Side. It was elegant but modest, with high ceilings and plaster moldings instead of floor-to-ceiling glass. The silence was the most jarring part. For 2 decades, her life had been filled with the noise of Raphael's world, the ping of his BlackBerry, the drone of financial news on TV, the endless chatter at dinner parties. Now the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a city siren. Her only real friend, a woman named Catherine, who had been her maid of honor and was now a tenured professor at NYU, came over with 2 bottles of wine and a bag of takeout. $5 million is not nothing, Josie, Catherine said, trying to be practical as she unpacked containers of pad thai onto the small kitchen table. It's enough to never work again. But that's all I've ever wanted to do, Josephine confessed, her voice cracking. Work. Have something that was mine. He took my ambition, Kat. He convinced me it was a flaw, that his ambition was enough for both of us, and I let him. So take it back, Catherine said fiercely. The world of art history hasn't vanished. You're brilliant. You still have your mind. The words were meant to be encouraging, but they felt hollow. The art world was notoriously insular and fast-moving. She had been out of it for more than 20 years. She was a relic. Who would take a 51-year-old academic dropout seriously? Days bled into weeks. She'd wake up, drink coffee, and stare out the window at the unfamiliar street. She saw Raphael and Tiffany in the society pages online, them at a charity ball, her arm possessively looped through his, them courtside at a Knicks game, Tiffany pouting for a selfie. A headline in a gossip column read, Shaw's new lease on life. They called her his elegant but retiring ex-wife. She had been relegated to a parenthetical in his story. One rainy Tuesday, drowning in the echo chamber of her apartment, she saw an email from Catherine. The subject line was, You are going to this. It was an invitation to a private reception and preview at the Lefebvre Gallery in Chelsea for a new exhibit, Displaced, a collection of works with contested provenance from the mid-20th century. It was her exact field of study. Her heart gave a painful throb. I can't, Kat, she typed back. I don't have anything to wear. I don't know anyone. Catherine's reply was instant. 1. Buy a dress. 2. You know me. 3. I already RSVP'd for you. Be ready at 7. Non-negotiable. A wave of panic seized her. The thought of walking into a room full of people, of having to answer the inevitable question, so what do you do, was terrifying. For 22 years, the answer was simple. I'm Rafael Shaw's wife. What was she now? A divorcee with a portfolio of unfinished research. But a tiny, defiant spark flickered within her. Rafael had taken her life. but he would not take her courage. She had spent 2 decades shrinking herself to fit into his world. The thought of staying in this apartment, slowly fading into obscurity, was more frightening than facing a room full of strangers. That afternoon, she walked into a boutique in Soho. She bypassed the brightly coloured, trend-driven pieces and found a simple, beautifully cut navy blue silk dress. It was understated, elegant, and timeless. It was the kind of dress Josephine Adler would have worn, not Mrs. Rafael Shaw. As she stood in front of the mirror, she saw a flicker of the woman she used to be, the one with a fire in her eyes and a passion for uncovering lost stories. For the first time in a month, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like a survivor. The Lefebvre Gallery was a cavern of white walls and polished concrete floors, buzzing with the low hum of cultured conversation. Waiters in black navigated the crowd with trays of champagne flutes. Josephine clutched her glass like a lifeline, feeling deeply out of her element. The art world, she quickly realized, had gotten younger. The attendees were a mix of sharp-suited collectors, impossibly cool artists in designer sneakers, and critics with severe haircuts. Catherine, a whirlwind of academic confidence, knew everyone. She introduced Josephine to a few people, but the moment they heard her name, their eyes would flicker with recognition. Adler. Wait. Weren't you married to Rafael Shaw? The question hung in the air, an invisible label she couldn't peel off. She would murmur a polite confirmation, and the conversation would invariably stall, their interest shifting elsewhere. She was a social artifact, a piece of gossip, not a peer. Feeling defeated, she excused herself and retreated to the periphery of the room, finding solace in the art itself. She stopped in front of a small, dark oil painting in a heavy gilt frame. The placard read, "Portrait of a young man, Circle of Rembrandt, c. 1650. Provenance, unknown before 1946. It was a beautiful piece, but something felt off. The brushwork on the lace collar was too precise, too flat for the era. The treatment of light on the subject's cheek, the chiaroscuro, lacked the depth and soul of Rembrandt, or even his most talented students. She leaned closer, her academic instincts, dormant for so long, suddenly firing on all cylinders. "The craquelure is wrong," a deep voice said beside her. Josephine turned. The man standing next to her was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that was clearly bespoke. He had silvering hair at the temples, kind eyes, and a face that suggested a life of thoughtful observation rather than ruthless ambition. He looked to be in his late 50s. "I'm sorry," she said, startled. "The network of fine cracks on the surface," he elaborated, gesturing toward the painting with his champagne flute. "It's too uniform. It suggests artificial aging, a masterful forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. Don't you think?" Josephine was taken aback. He was voicing her exact thoughts. "The impasto on the collar, too," she found herself saying, her voice gaining confidence. "The paint is built up, but without the directional energy you'd see from a 17th century master. It's almost hesitant." The man's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Precisely. Hesitant. What a perfect word. You have a very good eye." He extended a hand. "Dominic Beaumont." The name meant nothing to her. She shook his hand. "Josephine Adler." He registered her name, but there was no flicker of gossip column recognition, just polite acknowledgement. "A pleasure, Josephine. Are you a collector?" "No," she said. And for the first time that night, she didn't follow it up with an apology or a long-winded explanation. "I'm a researcher, or I was. My field is provenance, specifically art displaced during World War II. Dominic's focus intensified. "That's fascinating. So much of our history is written in the margins of auction catalogues and shipping manifests. A dark history. For the next 20 minutes they stood there, the noise of the party fading away, completely absorbed in a spirited debate about the painting. They discussed the Dutch masters, the meticulous techniques of famous forgers like Han van Meegeren, and the shadowy world of art recovery. Josephine felt a part of her brain light up that had been dark for years. She was speaking her own language again, not just parroting Rafael's opinions on market trends. She felt alive. She felt like herself. It was only when Catherine tapped her on the shoulder that the bubble burst. "Josie, I have to run. My babysitter has a curfew. Are you okay to get a cab?" "Of course," Josephine said, turning back to Dominic. "It was a pleasure speaking with you, Mr. Beaumont." "The pleasure was all mine, Ms. Adler," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "It's rare to find someone who speaks the language of paint so fluently." He handed her a simple, heavy cardstock business card. "If you are ever looking to resume your research, I would be very interested in hearing from you." She glanced at the card. It read simply, "Dominic Beaumont, Beaumont Enterprises." Just then, a commotion near the gallery entrance drew their attention. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Framed in the doorway, like a predator surveying his territory, was Rafael Shaw, and clinging to his arm, wearing a dress that was arguably more sequins than fabric, was Tiffany. Josephine's blood ran cold. Of all the galleries in all of New York, he had to walk into this one. Rafael scanned the room, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, landing on her. His expression tightened for a fraction of a second. He saw her, and then he saw the distinguished man she was speaking with. A smirk played on his lips, a look of condescending amusement. He probably assumed she was desperately trying to latch on to another wealthy man. He began to steer Tiffany in their direction, clearly intending to mark his territory and indulge in a moment of public condescension. Josephine's first instinct was to flee. But then she felt the weight of Dominic's business card in her hand and the memory of their exhilarating conversation. She had spent 22 years avoiding conflict, smoothing things over for Rafael. Not anymore. She stood her ground, her back straight, her expression serene. She would not be intimidated. She was no longer his wife, and this was no longer his world to command. As Rafael and Tiffany approached, a slow-motion disaster Josephine was powerless to stop. Dominic Beaumont turned to her, seemingly oblivious to the impending confrontation. "Beaumont Enterprises," he said, tapping the card she held. "It's mostly a holding company for my tech investments, but my real passion is the Beaumont Foundation. We fund arts and education initiatives, and on a personal level, I try to repatriate stolen art to its rightful owners. It's a quiet crusade of mine." Josephine's mind reeled. Beaumont Enterprises. The Beaumont Enterprises? Dominic Beaumont wasn't just a wealthy enthusiast. He was a titan, a name whispered in the same breath as tech visionaries like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. But he was famously private, rarely photographed. Rafael, for all his Wall Street bluster, was a yacht in the harbor. This man owned the shipping lanes. Rafael arrived, his presence sucking the air out of their small circle. He clapped a hand on Dominic's shoulder with a familiarity that was entirely unearned. "Dominic, good to see you. Didn't expect to find you slumming it at a gallery opening." Rafael boomed, his voice oozing false bonhomie. He was performing, showing off for Tiffany. Dominic's expression remained placid, but he subtly shifted, dislodging Rafael's hand. "Rafael, I'm here for the art, not the scene." His eyes flickered to Tiffany, who was busy taking a selfie with a sculpture in the background, then back to Josephine. There was a cool dismissal in his gaze that Rafael either missed or chose to ignore. "I see you've met my ex-wife, Josephine," Rafael said, a proprietary tone still clinging to his words. He gave Josephine a look that was meant to be pitying. "She's trying to get back into her old hobbies, art and such." The condescension was thick enough to taste. He was framing her as a bored, pathetic divorcee with a little project. Josephine's chin lifted. Before she could speak, Dominic stepped in smoothly. "Miss Adler and I were just having a fascinating discussion," he said, his voice calm but firm, a clear rebuke to Rafael's tone. "Her insights into the collection are more valuable than any I've heard tonight. In fact, I was just about to offer her a consulting position." The silence that followed was stunning. Rafael's jaw went slack. Tiffany stopped mid-pout for her camera. They both stared, first at Dominic, then at Josephine, as if seeing her for the first time. "A consulting position?" Rafael stammered, his bravado finally cracking. "For Josie." "In what?" "My foundation is currently attempting to acquire a private collection in Geneva," Dominic explained, his attention focused solely on Josephine, effectively cutting Rafael out of the conversation. "The collection includes several pieces believed to have passed through the hands of Hermann Göring. The provenance is a mess. It requires a specialist with a delicate touch and a deep knowledge of the period. It requires someone like Ms. Adler." He turned fully to her. "The work would involve authenticating the collection and tracing its history. There would be significant travel involved, to Geneva, Berlin, perhaps Paris. We would, of course, compensate you at the highest professional rate. Would that be of any interest to you, Ms. Adler?" It wasn't a handout. It wasn't pity. It was a legitimate, high-level professional offer presented to her in front of the man who had told her she was worth nothing more than a severance check. It was validation. It was a lifeline. It was everything. "Yes," Josephine said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, Mr. Beaumont, that would be of great interest." "Excellent," Dominic smiled. "My assistant will call you tomorrow to arrange the details." He gave her a slight, respectful nod, then turned his cool gaze back to Rafael. "Sure. Good to see you." And with that, he moved away, melting into the crowd as discreetly as he had appeared. Rafael stared at the space Dominic had just occupied, then at Josephine. His face was a mask of disbelief and dawning fury. His plan to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly. She wasn't just talking to a random man. She was talking to Dominic Beaumont, a man whose net worth made Rafael's look like pocket change. And not only was she talking to him, but she had also just been offered a prestigious job that he, with all his connections, could never have secured for her. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "What did you say to him? Are you sleeping with him?" Tiffany looked between them, her perfectly made-up face, a picture of confusion. "Babe, who was that guy?" Josephine looked at the man she had spent 2 decades with, at his contorted, jealous face, and felt nothing but a profound sense of release. He hadn't seen her value, so he couldn't comprehend why anyone else would. His world was transactional. Everything was bought and sold, even people. "Goodbye, Rafael," she said, her voice calm. She gave him a small, final smile, turned her back on him and his vapid new life, and walked out of the gallery into the cool night air. The business card for Beaumont Enterprises feeling like a key in her hand. A key to a door she thought had been locked forever. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. True to his word, Dominic's office called the following morning. The offer was more than a consulting position. It was a role as the lead provenance researcher for the entire Beaumont Foundation, with a salary that rivaled a senior Wall Street analyst's. They set her up with an office in the Beaumont Enterprises building on Park Avenue, 3 blocks from the penthouse she had been evicted from, and a corporate apartment for her travels. Josephine dove into the work with a ferocious hunger. She spent her days buried in archives, cross-referencing auction records, and communicating with curators in Europe. The files on the Geneva collection were a tangled, fascinating puzzle. She worked late, fueled by coffee and a rediscovered sense of purpose. The cobwebs in her mind cleared. The muscle memory of academic rigor returned. She was no longer just Josie, the ex-wife. She was Dr. Adler, the expert. Her first trip was to Geneva. Dominic insisted she fly on the company jet, a state-of-the-art Gulfstream G700. As she stepped from the tarmac onto the plush cream carpet of the aircraft's interior, she couldn't help but think of the countless commercial flights she had endured with Rafael, who, despite his wealth, was pathologically cheap about things he didn't see as status symbols. He'd have them fly business class, but complain about the cost, while a jet like this was a tool for someone like Dominic, a way to manipulate time. Dominic met her in Geneva. They spent their days in the sterile, climate-controlled viewing room of a high-security free port, examining the collection. He was not a passive employer. He was a partner. He listened intently as she pointed out the faint inconsistencies in a signature on a Pissarro, or the historical inaccuracies of a seal on the back of a canvas. He valued her mind, her expertise. Their conversations flowed easily from art to history to world affairs. There was a respect and intellectual chemistry she had never known. One evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Geneva, he spoke about his late wife, who had passed away from cancer 5 years prior. She had been an architect, he told her, and the foundation was her legacy. He spoke of her with a gentle reverence that moved Josephine deeply. It was a stark contrast to Raphael's crude dismissal of their shared history. She always said that beauty without a story is just decoration, Dominic said, swirling the wine in his glass. You, Josephine, you give the beauty its story back. It's an incredible gift. Josephine felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly seen. The trip was a success. She authenticated several key pieces and flagged 2 as probable forgeries, saving the foundation millions. On the flight back to New York, Dominic received a message on his tablet. He read it, and a slight, wry smile touched his lips. "Well, this is an interesting coincidence," he said, angling the screen toward her. It was an email from the M&A division of Beaumont Enterprises. The subject line was, "Urgent, Shaw Capital Acquisition Proposal." Josephine read the first few lines, her stomach tightening. Raphael's hedge fund, Shaw Capital, was in trouble. A series of risky, over-leveraged bets had gone sour. He was hemorrhaging money and investors. In a desperate move, he was trying to get a lifeline, a buyout from a larger entity. He was petitioning Beaumont Enterprises. "His numbers are a disaster," Dominic said, his tone purely analytical. "Ego-driven investments with no real long-term strategy. He's looking for a parachute before he crashes and burns. The board will almost certainly reject it." Josephine looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below. Raphael, the master of the universe, was begging for scraps from the man sitting next to her. The cosmic irony was staggering. "Does he know about your connection to the foundation?" she asked. "Unlikely," Dominic said. "I keep my business and philanthropic ventures very separate. To him, I'm just the faceless head of the corporation he's pitching to." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "I can recuse myself from the decision, of course, to avoid any conflict of interest." Josephine thought for a moment. The old her, the peacemaker, would have urged him to. But something had shifted. This wasn't personal. This was business, and Rafael was a bad businessman. Your board should make their decision based on the merits of the proposal, she said calmly. My past with him has no bearing on whether his company is a sound investment. Dominic nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. I agree. When they landed at Teterboro Airport, a private car was waiting. As they drove toward Manhattan, they passed a line of taxis waiting for passengers from the commercial terminals. And standing in that line, looking haggard and furious under the fluorescent lights, was Rafael. His tie was loosened, he was yelling into his phone, and Tiffany was standing beside him, looking miserable and shivering in a ridiculously inadequate jacket. He had clearly just gotten off a commercial flight. Their car, a silent, gleaming Maybach, slid past them. Rafael looked up from his phone, his eyes widening in shock as he saw her. He saw Josephine, sitting beside Dominic Beaumont, in a car that cost more than a house, fresh off a private jet. He saw her looking serene, powerful, and utterly indifferent to him. The look on his face, a cocktail of rage, jealousy, and pure, unadulterated shock, was more satisfying than any revenge she could have ever plotted. She hadn't sought it out. She had simply moved on, and in doing so, had risen so high that she was now looking down on the ruins of the man who had tried to destroy her. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply met his gaze for a second, then turned her attention back to her conversation with Dominic, leaving Rafael standing in the cold, a relic of a life she no longer recognized. The rejection email from Beaumont Enterprises landed in Rafael Shaw's inbox like a death sentence. It was brief, clinical, and brutal. After careful review of the proposal from Shaw Capital, the board has decided not to move forward at this time. We find the fund's current strategy and debt-to-asset ratio to be incompatible with our investment portfolio. It was corporate speak for, "You're toxic." The news of the rejection spread through Wall Street like a virus. Beaumont Enterprises was a bellwether. Their refusal to bail out Shaw Capital was a signal to everyone else. The rats began to abandon the sinking ship. His top investors, already nervous, pulled their capital. His credit lines were frozen. Within a week, Shaw Capital was in a death spiral. Rafael was a caged animal. He paced the Park Avenue penthouse. The one Tiffany was now complaining was too stuffy, barking into his phone at brokers, lawyers, and former allies who were now screening his calls. The swagger was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate panic. "They didn't even take a second meeting!" he raged at his lawyer over the phone one afternoon. "It's Beaumont. I know him. He has a personal vendetta against me." His lawyer, a seasoned corporate attorney named Bill, sighed on the other end of the line. "Greg, his board made the call. Their analysts looked at your books. The numbers don't lie. This isn't personal." But Rafael couldn't accept that. In his narcissistic world, everything was personal. He couldn't fathom that his failure was his own doing. It had to be a conspiracy, and at the center of it, in his mind, was Josephine. He became obsessed. He'd seen her with Beaumont. She had somehow poisoned the well, turned the most powerful man in the city against him. The woman he had dismissed as a decorative, ambitionless accessory had somehow orchestrated his ruin. The thought was so galling, so impossible, it drove him to madness. His paranoia began to seep into his relationship with Tiffany. The lifestyle he had promised her was evaporating. The Black Amex was declined at Bergdorf's. The reservation for a weekend in St. Bart's was quietly cancelled. "What do you mean we can't go?" Tiffany whined, looking up from her phone where she was editing a selfie. "I already told all my followers we were going. It's like crucial for my brand engagement." "There's a market downturn, Tiffany. Try to understand, he snarled, snatching the phone from her hand. This is the real world, not your curated fantasy land on Instagram. Their fights became more frequent and more vicious. She accused him of being a liar, a fake rich guy. He accused her of being a shallow, vapid gold digger. Both were right. The glamorous illusion that had brought them together was shattering, revealing the ugly, transactional reality beneath. Meanwhile, Josephine's world was expanding. She was in Berlin, working with the German government to trace the lineage of a painting found in the Geneva collection. She spent her days in the hushed, hallowed halls of the Gemäldegalerie, and her evenings dining with Dominic, who had flown in for a meeting. Their relationship was evolving beyond a professional one. It was slow, tentative, built on a foundation of shared passions and mutual admiration. He never pushed, never presumed. He simply made it clear he enjoyed her company more than anyone he'd met in a very long time. One evening they were strolling through the Tiergarten after dinner. The air was crisp, and the scent of autumn was all around them. I heard about Raphael's fund collapsing, Josephine said quietly, breaking a comfortable silence. It's all over the financial news. Dominic nodded. It was inevitable. He built a house of cards on a foundation of ego. It was bound to fall. He stopped and turned to her, his expression serious. I want to be clear, Josephine. The board's decision had nothing to do with you or your history with him, but I will admit, seeing how he treated you confirmed every reservation I had about his character. A man who cannot value a partnership of 22 years cannot be trusted to be a partner in business. It was the final piece of validation she needed. Her failure in Raphael's eyes, her lack of ruthless, transactional ambition, was precisely what Dominic saw as a sign of her strength and integrity. The final blow for Raphael came a week later. As part of the liquidation of his assets, the Park Avenue penthouse had to be sold. The Hamptons estate was next. Tiffany, seeing the last vestiges of the life she'd signed up for, disappear, packed her designer bags, took one last selfie in the marble bathroom, and left, announcing her conscious uncoupling to her followers. Raphael was left alone in the echoing, half-empty apartment. The movers were taking the art, the furniture, everything. He received a call from his real estate agent. Good news, Greg. We have a buyer for the penthouse, a cash offer, well over asking. They want to close immediately. A flicker of relief. Great. Who is it? There was a hesitant pause on the other end of the line. The offer is from a private trust, the Beaumont Foundation. Raphael dropped the phone. It was the ultimate checkmate. Dominic Beaumont, via his foundation, was buying his home. He pictured Josephine walking through those rooms, redesigning the space, erasing the last traces of him. He, Rafael Shaw, was being displaced, written out of his own story, just as he had done to her. The humiliation was absolute. It was a ruin of his own making, but the architect of his replacement was the woman he had thrown away. A year can be an eternity. It can be a crucible, burning away the non-essential, leaving behind only the resilient, tempered truth of a person's character. For Josephine Adler, the past year had been exactly that. The great hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a symphony of light and sound. The vast, vaulted space, normally filled with the reverent quiet of tourists and art lovers, was now buzzing with the electric energy of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet. Light from grand chandeliers cast a golden glow on the immaculately dressed attendees, patrons whose names graced hospital wings, critics from the most respected international publications, and dignitaries who had flown in from across the globe. Tonight was the culmination of everything. The opening of the The Ghost Collection, Repatriated Masterpieces of World War II. Standing just off stage, partially concealed by a marble pillar, Josephine took a slow, deliberate breath. She could feel the familiar thrum of nervous energy, but it was no longer the sharp anxiety of inadequacy she had once known. This was different. It was the keen, vibrant anticipation of an athlete before a race she knew she was ready to run. She smoothed the front of her emerald green gown, a color chosen for its symbolism of renewal and life. It was a couturier piece, a gift from Dominic, but it felt less like a costume and more like armor, tailored to the woman she had become. A museum director, a distinguished man with a neatly trimmed silver beard, approached her. "Everything is perfect, Dr. Adler. The layout, the lighting, it's breathtaking. The board is ecstatic. You've given the museum its most significant exhibition in a decade." "Thank you, Robert," she replied, her smile genuine. "But the art did all the heavy lifting. We just gave it a platform to speak." He nodded, his eyes full of respect. "You gave it a voice." It was time. As she was introduced, a wave of thunderous applause filled the hall. She walked to the podium, her steps measured and confident. The sea of faces before her, once a source of terror, now looked like a garden of possibility. She saw Catherine in the front row, wiping away a proud tear. She saw the descendants of a Jewish family from Vienna, whose Gustav Klimt painting she had personally helped recover. They were looking at her with an expression of profound gratitude. And to the side, leaning against an archway, was Dominic. He wasn't looking at the crowd or the spectacle. His eyes were fixed only on her, his gaze a steady, unwavering anchor of belief. She gripped the sides of the lectern, the wood cool and solid beneath her fingers. "Every painting has a secret history," she began, her voice clear and carrying, silencing the last of the room's chatter. A story of the hands that held it, the walls it graced, and sometimes the darkness it witnessed. These are not merely objects of beauty. They are survivors. They are silent witnesses to the upheaval of a continent, to the loss of families, to the deep, human tragedy of war. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. For decades, many of these masterpieces were ghosts, haunting the margins of history, hidden away in vaults or hanging on the walls of those who had no right to them. Our job, as curators and historians, is not merely to preserve the object, but to honor its journey, to follow the faint trail of ink on a shipping manifest, to decipher a faded stamp on the back of a canvas, to connect a family's fading photograph to a masterpiece they thought was lost forever. Tonight, we do more than open an exhibition. We close a chapter of injustice. We welcome these pieces home. The applause that erupted was immediate and overwhelming. It was a roar of appreciation, of understanding, of shared humanity. Josephine felt a warmth spread through her, a profound sense of rightness. This was work that mattered. This was her life's purpose, reclaimed from the dust. Later, as she walked through the crowded galleries, she was no longer an observer. This was her domain. She stopped before the reclaimed Klimt. Birch Forest where? The elderly woman she'd seen in the audience, Mrs. Liesel Vogel, approached her, her frail hand resting on Josephine's arm. "My grandfather described this painting to me when I was a little girl," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He said looking at it was like tasting sunshine after a long winter. You have given my family back its sunshine, Dr. Adler." Josephine's throat tightened. "It was my profound honor, Mrs. Vogel." Across the room, near the bustling catering station set up by the Temple of Dendur, a man moved with a stiff, unnatural posture. He wore a standard-issue black server's uniform, the jacket tight across his shoulders, the pants a fraction too short. He was heavier now, his face puffy and flushed, the sharp lines of his former arrogance blurred into a permanent mask of sour resentment. He refilled champagne flutes with mechanical efficiency, his eyes scanning the crowd, a ghost at a feast he had once hosted. Rafael Shaw was working this event for a temp agency, one of the few jobs he could get that didn't require a background check into his spectacularly failed finances. He saw Josephine across the gallery, holding court. He watched as people hung on her every word, their faces alight with admiration. He saw Dominic Beaumont join her, not to overshadow her, but to stand beside her, a quiet partner in her triumph. The sight was a physical torment, a constant, grinding reminder of the world he had lost, or more accurately, the world he had never truly understood. It was a universe of substance and intellect, while he had only ever dealt in the currency of bluster and ego. A wealthy patron, his face flushed with champagne, turned abruptly, not looking where he was going. He slammed directly into Rafael, who was holding a full tray of fresh glasses. The tray tilted, and a dozen crystal flutes crashed to the marble floor in a sickening, explosive shatter. The sound cut through the elegant hum of the party. A small circle of silence formed around Rafael as people turned to stare. "Watch it, you clumsy oaf!" the patron snapped, wiping a splash of champagne from his sleeve with a look of disgust. "This is a Zegna suit. Do you have any idea what this costs?" Raphael's face burned with a shame so hot it felt like it was peeling his skin off. He mumbled an apology, a pathetic, strangled sound. He dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he began to pick up the larger shards of broken glass. He was on the floor, a servant, being reprimanded for his incompetence. And as he knelt there, amid the glittering debris of his humiliation, he looked up. His gaze swept past the expensive shoes and the hems of designer gowns, and found her. Across the gallery, illuminated by a spotlight on a nearby sculpture, stood Josephine. She was laughing, her head tilted back in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy at something Dominic had said. She wasn't just beautiful. She was luminous, radiant with a power that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with purpose. She didn't see him. He was a piece of the scenery, a minor disruption, as insignificant as the broken glass at her feet. In that single, devastating moment, the last of Raphael's bitterness and rage dissolved, leaving a cold, hollow void. He finally understood. She hadn't plotted against him. She hadn't sought revenge. She hadn't wasted a single moment thinking about him at all. His downfall wasn't a chapter in her story. It wasn't even a footnote. He had been completely and utterly erased. Later that evening, the crowds had thinned. Josephine found a moment of quiet on the museum's private rooftop terrace. The cool night air, a welcome balm. The glittering panorama of Central Park and the city skyline spread out before her. It was the same view she once had from the penthouse, a view Raphael had claimed to own. But from here, it felt different. It wasn't a possession. It was a shared beauty, a landscape of infinite possibility. Dominic came to stand beside her, handing her a glass of water. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant rhythmic pulse of the city. "I believe your dissertation was titled The Ghost Collection," he said, his voice soft. Josephine smiled, a genuine, reflective smile. "It was, a lifetime ago." "Well, you did more than finish it, Dr. Adler," he said, his tone full of a quiet warmth that reached a place deep inside her. He gently took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "You brought it to life. You gave the ghosts a voice." She looked at their intertwined hands, then up at his face, and felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace. Rafael had left her for a younger woman, for a life he thought was an upgrade. He saw power in stock prices and status in brand names. But Josephine had learned the truth on her long journey home to herself. Real power wasn't about what you owned or who you controlled. It was about what you created, what you restored, and the courage it took to tell the stories that deserved to be heard. She was flying far higher than a private jet now. She was soaring on wings forged in fire, wings she had built herself. And her story, the real one, was just beginning. Josephine's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to resilience and the rediscovery of self-worth. She was discarded by a man who saw her as an object, only to be recognized for her true value by someone who saw her as a person. Her journey from a penthouse prisoner to a celebrated curator shows us that the most luxurious thing you can ever possess is a life built on your own terms, with your own passion. Rafael Shaw didn't lose his fortune because of a bad market. He lost it because he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of value. He traded gold for glitter, and in the end was left with nothing. What did you think of Josephine's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to completely rebuild and rediscover who you are? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were inspired by this story of triumph, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama and powerful stories. Thank you for listening.